back in the garage, back in the garage, in the garage, in the garage, back in the garage today, back in the garage, back in the garage today. Alright guys, back in the garage today where we're going to be discussing, talking about, and showing you how to do air filter maintenance, specifically when it comes to your dirt bike, but really it's about any bike that has a foam air filter. So some things you're going to need in order to properly maintain your air filter. You're going to need some air filter cleaner. You're going to need some air filter oil. I'm also going to recommend some grease. Some rubber gloves are always a good idea. And then you're going to need some sort of bucket. This is my new bucket that I recently bought. I shouldn't be so excited about a bucket, but I really like this bucket. This is the bucket we used for like 2 years to clean them up. You can buy these at Lowe's for, I don't know, $4 or $5. They'll work fine. I will show you a little bit about why I like this bucket a little bit better for cleaning air filters, but just something. Don't do it inside in your sink or your wife is gonna have a fit. It's best to do this out in the garage. All right, so the first thing you need to do is put on some gloves because this gets really, really nasty. I buy these gloves at Harbor Freight for like $8 a box. I'm actually gonna go through 2 sets on here. With your air filter removed from your bike, the first thing you need to do is then remove it from whatever sort of cage it's on. So this one is out of Noah's 65. So we're gonna pull this little plug out here, which doesn't even seem to wanna come out. So we just pulled the little plug out there in the middle that holds it in. Then we're gonna pop it off the frame there. And then we wanna clean this thing up because you can tell it's pretty dirty. So the reason why I switched over to this Twin Airs bucket is because it's got some features built in that a regular bucket doesn't. And now, you could probably source these parts. It probably wouldn't be that difficult to find, but you can pick these buckets up for around $15. It has a nice, easy seal on it, unlike that other bucket that kind of snaps on almost like a paint bucket where I got to kick it on. This one's much easier to get off. Pop the lid off there, and then I'll show you what makes this a little bit different in just a second. Now, another thing you're going to need is some air filter cleaner. I've been using this Motul stuff. It works well for me. There are a bunch of different cleaners out there, and I should say that if you're using an air filter cleaner like this, I'm assuming you're not using no toil. If you're using no toil air filter spray or oil, you need to use no filters cleaner, which is a totally different process than what I'm about to show you. But if you're using something like this Maxima oil or Twin Airs oil or anything of that nature, then the method I'm about to show you will work fine. But again, if you're using no toil spray or no toil oil, use the no toil cleaner. So this bucket's not full right now. I just bought a new thing of cleaner, so you're just gonna go ahead and dump this down into your bucket. And keep in mind, this isn't one-use stuff. We can use this over and over and over again for quite a while before it's no longer gonna be any good. And part of the reason we want a seal on a bucket is because this stuff will start to evaporate if it's not sealed up, and it's not the cheapest stuff in the world, so we want to make it last as long as possible. Now, the solvent would normally be clear when we first put it in. However, I'd used a little bit of it on the bottom to clean a filter the other day, so that's some of the oil residue you see in there. Now, what separates this bucket from a normal bucket is this piece right here. This sits down on the bottom, and what it allows us to do is set the filter all the way down there, but then the dirt, like the heavier particles, you can probably see where some of them are around. We don't have to worry about the filter getting down in that dirt. It'll keep a nice layer down there, keeping this up here much cleaner because the heavy particles will fall to the bottom. So what we want to do is we're going to take our filter, we're going to totally submerge it. So another nice thing about this bucket is it comes with this piece right here, because you can see the filter is going to float. And I'm gonna need 2 hands to do this, but we're gonna press this down on here. It'll hold the filter down in place and let it soak in the solvent for a while. All right, so it may be a little hard to see, but you can probably see it. I've got the metal wire piece holding the filter down in there. We're gonna let that soak in there for just a couple of minutes. Then we're gonna pull this piece back out, take a look at the filter. All right, so I let the filter soak for just a few minutes. I've pulled that wire frame back out. Now I wanna take a look at it. I can see there's still a little bit of dirt and debris in here, so you could let it soak a little bit longer, or you can just work it down in the solvent, take your fingers, try to massage that oil out of there. You want to get as much cleaner in there as you can, and you're just basically washing it up by hand. The nice thing is, if you do inadvertently drop it, it's not going to drop down in that dirt because you've got that little strainer down there on the bottom of it. Once you've got the filter as clean as it's going to get, or as clean as you think it's going to get, what you want to do is squeeze some of the extra solvent out. Now, what you don't want to do is wring the filter because you take the chance of breaking down the seams here. So just give it a good squeeze. Get as much of this stuff out of here as you can, but obviously put it back in your bucket. There's nothing wrong with the solvent. Like I said, we're gonna be able to reuse that many, many times. All right, so with the solvent out of it, you just need to set it down somewhere. Now, I do know some shops that have some cool setups where you can dry these things a little faster. But the good news about the solvent, at least I'm using from Motul because it's kind of gasoline based, is it's gonna dry very, very quickly. Speaking of drying, you wanna make sure you put your cap back on your bucket so you don't dry out your solvent. Make sure it's good and sealed up, and then we'll come back and oil the filter. All right, so with our filter good and dry, the next thing we need to do is oil this filter. Now, there are three main methods to accomplish this. The first one is to use spray-on oil. That comes in a bottle, and it's got a little spout on it. You're literally just gonna spray it on. That's one way to do it. That's not the way I personally like to do it. I find it uses way more oil that way, and that stuff's kind of expensive. The next way is to use this pour-on oil, and there's actually two ways to use it. The first way is to put it in a shallow bucket, put your filter down in, totally soak it, pull your filter back out, wring out the excess. Or the way I like to do it, because that way I don't over fill it with oil, is I like to pour it on like syrup on a pancake. So I literally just pour some on, and then obviously put your gloves on. With your gloves on, what you want to do is then just work this around in the filter. You want to make sure it's good and even throughout, and you want to make sure it's come through the other side there. And then we'll do the same thing at the end of this as you would with the spray-on method or just soaking it. Just squeeze out the excess, kind of like we did with the solvent earlier. This takes a couple of minutes. I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of this off camera, and then I'll come back on and show you at least my final step is when it comes to servicing the air filter on your dirt bike. All right, now that I've got a good even coat of oil all throughout the filter, the next thing I need to do is put it back on its cage. Now, one thing I should have mentioned earlier on, if you find there are any rips or tears, whether it's in the seam or somewhere else on the filter, replace it. It's not worth the possible damage it could do to your engine, and these things aren't that expensive to begin with. So we're just gonna fit this back into, whoops, it's a little slippery. We're gonna fit this back into its cage. Get everything lined up internally here. And then in the case of this one, we've got this little button on here, so we want to make sure it goes through. I know which way it's supposed to be oriented. And we're pretty much done. There is one final step I like to take. Now, this filter does have a rubber gasket around it. Some do, some don't. Noah's filters in his other bike don't. This one does though. One thing I still like to do though is get out my tub of grease, and you can use this directly on the foam if you don't have a rubber gasket. And I just like to take a thin bead of grease all around the filter. And we're doing this for basically one big reason. It's gonna help create a better seal inside the air box to ensure we don't have any air gaps, and also just help keep some of the dirt from getting in around the seal there and into your air box, possibly damaging your engine. So that's pretty much it. The only thing I have left to do now is put it back in the bike. So those are my steps and my techniques for how we service air filters on our dirt bikes. It's a fairly simple process. It is a little messy, so always keep some rubber gloves on hand. But that's it. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, please give it a big thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider hitting that subscribe button, because if you like motorcycles, well, this is the place to be. If you have any questions about maybe the products I used or the way I did things, let me know down in the comments section below. I'm sure some of you guys have slightly different methods for the way you service your air filter, and that's fine. Everybody's going to do things a little bit differently, but as long as you get that filter clean and get it re-oiled, it's going to last you for a really long time. And as always, I'll talk to you again soon.